In 1979, lightning finally struck ACDC. After 6 years of throwing out sparks, the band's hard-charging, high-decibel rock and roll finally exploded into the mainstream.
No stop signs, speed limit.
They weren't glitter rockers, they weren't heavy metal. Their schoolboy drag aside, ACDC were in a class by themselves, with a sound all their own.
The main thing about it is that it gives rock music a real kick in the guts, you know?
On stage and off, the band's rough and rowdy lead singer, Bon Scott, was the embodiment of ACDC's power and passion.
Bon was becoming a real hero very quickly amongst the tougher guys in the audience. They all wanted Bon to drink the wild life, you know, they loved him.
Scotland Yard said the body of 30-year-old Bon Scott was discovered.
Then in 1980, 5 years after he energized the band, Bon Scott was found dead.
A post-mortem will be carried out later today to establish the...
Bon Scott died drinking. His death nearly killed the band.
I don't think we'll ever get over that one, you know.
It's so hard to believe that the next day they're not there.
He'd been part of our lives for a long time, you know.
I was a bit numb, you know. I was really a bit numb, really.
Bon was Bon. He was always the same and never expected anything to happen to him. It was quite a shock.
We wanted to continue the band, but we just didn't have the will to at the time.
For ACDC, the death of Bon Scott was more than the loss of a bandmate. It was a death in the family. Malcolm and Angus were looking for a new frontman when in the summer of '74, their future drove up in the person of Ronald Bon Scott.
Cut this.
It was kind of weird. He pulled up in this old, beat-up 50s car, you know. You could barely see. You just saw this sort of maniac head and this, you know, this crazy guy coming flying down the road.
I'm hot, and when I'm not, I'm cold as ice.
Like the Young brothers, Bon Scott was another Scottish immigrant raised in Australia.
When we met him for the first time, it was like we'd known him forever. No with Bon, no with us guys. He almost became a brother.
Bon was a headstrong, wild child, bound and determined to be a rock star.
All he wanted to do was be the singer in a band. You couldn't stop him once he made up his mind. That was what he wanted to do, and he just did it.
Bon dreamed of fame, but found trouble instead. By 1974, he had already served jail time for assaulting a cop and had recently survived a near-fatal motorcycle crash. Bon had already burned out in local bands like the Valentines and Fraternity. To Malcolm and Angus, Bon looked and sounded like a perfect fit for ACDC.
We knew Bon could sing rock and roll. And from that point, we kept pestering him, you know, would he like to come and sing?
We just said, do you want to join?
Angus and Malcolm had no doubts about hiring Bon Scott to front ACDC.
2 weeks later, we show up and we go, George, we've got a new singer. And he goes, what?
Big brother George felt his little brothers had lost their minds.
And Bon had a knee ring with a shark's jaw, I think, hanging off. It was about this big. Lost a couple of teeth from brawling, covered in tattoos. He looked like he'd been around the block more than a few times.
You know what I mean?
George was like, there's your man, no doubt. He says, that's reshaped the whole thing. You're a real rock and roll band now.
By 1974, 21-year-old Malcolm Young and his 19-year-old brother Angus had formed a band and found a frontman. 28-year-old Bon Scott was a perfect fit for ACDC, a hard-rocking, hard-living dynamo. His first appearance with the band was an omen of hell-raising to come.
The first gig, you know, he's got a bottle of bourbon and that's, he just juices it all, you know, and then he's got, you know, there's drugs and everything coming in. I said to Malcolm, I said, he'll be lucky if he can walk, let alone sing, you know.
Bon Scott's behavior may have been shocking, but his performance was electric.
And we heard his voice proper then. And thought, geez, that guy's got some voice. He can scream. A great melody. He's got great feel.
ACDC had found their voice. They went into the studio to record their debut album, and in January of '75, the band took their high-voltage act across the Australian club circuit.
They were the Aussie bloke's idea of a good time. It was just hard and down and fast and mean. Rib-crunching, skull-crushing, sort of blistering rock and roll. And you know they weren't going to slip in a ballad on you.
Having conquered Sydney's music scene, ACDC relocated to Melbourne and retooled the group's lineup. Bon Scott's voice had raised the band to another level, but there was room for improvement.
The first High Voltage album had been released, but they were still looking to sort of secure the permanent band members.
In early '75, drummer Phil Rudd joined the band. End the debauchery.
We were living in this house for 6 months. Still the best days of our lives. There was more action going on there than ever since. But we drank like it was no tomorrow. We woke up and drank again, and we just continued on like that for a long time.
The party continued that spring when ACDC's cover of Baby Please Don't Go went top 10 and became their first nationwide hit.
Baby, don't go! Baby, don't go!
That April, the band made a notorious appearance on Australian television as Bon gave new meaning to the phrase, dress for success.
I'll never forget it. On Countdown, Bon dressed in drag, you know? I mean, that was unheard of back then.
Bon's drag act served to further ACDC's raucous reputation, and by the summer of '75, they had a gold record and a growing fan base in Australia.
ACDC had a young audience, male and female, adoring this band.
But as ACDC's second album went to #2 in Australia, the band had no intention of remaining local heroes. In early '76, they scored a deal with Atlantic Records to release their music internationally. That spring, ACDC boarded a plane to London, looking to conquer the world.
I think it was inevitable that ACDC were going to outgrow Australia. There was a whole world waiting for them.
Their fast and furious style was a hit in London's burgeoning punk scene, and ACDC was soon headed cross-country to rock the rest of Great Britain. Their reputation as the rude and rowdy band from Australia preceded them.
I think they thought I was some sort of male stripper at some point. I think I played one night in Marquee nude. I didn't know that, you know, what, they arrest people for that? I didn't know.
ACDC came to be considered less a band than a band of outlaws. On stage, ACDC did everything they could to shock. Off stage, they got serious about their music, working with Angus and Malcolm's older brother George, who produced their next album, Let There Be Rock.
Me and Malcolm said, well, we really want a lot of guitars, you know, big guitars.
Released in the summer of '77, Let There Be Rock blasted onto the U.S. charts. ACDC were on the verge of becoming an international hard rock phenomenon. In January of 1979, ACDC began work on an album called Highway to Hell, a title the record company hated from the start.
They freaked with that title. They didn't want that title.
And I said hogwash, you know. We're calling it Highway to Hell, and that's how it is.
When Highway to Hell hit record stores that summer, its title spawned rumors that the wild men of ACDC were devil worshippers. But to ACDC, Highway to Hell was a tribute to the hard life of a touring rock and roll band.
If you'd have been on the road with us for those years up to that point, you would have known exactly what we were talking about.
After 6 hard years on the road and in the studio, ACDC's grit and determination were finally paying off. Bon Scott was enjoying the high times. Only for Bon, the high times were even higher.
We go back to the hotel, we say, oh, Bon, you know, it's 3 in the morning, you know, we've got to crash, we've got to go. And he goes, oh, just one more drink. And we'd wake up in the morning, Bon, wake up, oh. Then you get up back onto his drink. Oh, where were we?
Where they were was on the rise. Highway to Hell raced up the Billboard charts and hit the top 20 as the 70s came to a close. As the 80s began, ACDC looked forward to further rock and roll glory. But the new decade was doomed to begin not with distinction, but with sudden, shocking death. After 7 years and thousands of gigs, from the pubs of Australia to the stadiums of the world, ACDC rode Highway to Hell to international success in the summer of 1979. As the year drew to a close, the decade ahead promised more gold records and good fortune.
Are you rich, though? I mean, are you making the bread?
Yep. I just bought Big Ben.
But the band's exhausting workload and equally intense appetite for drugs and alcohol were taking their inevitable toll.
We've been working non-stop since the band started. It's just got to have a break occasionally.
Frontman Bon Scott led the partying as well. No one could stop Bon's wild ways, not even his beloved mother.
Got another empty bottle. You didn't tell Ron what to do. I never went too far. I just said I didn't like him drinking, but when they get to that stage, they don't listen to you.
Under pressure to record a follow-up to Highway to Hell, ACDC returned to London in January of 1980. Malcolm and Angus Young invited Bon to the studio, eager to play him the new music for their next album.
And he was fantastic. You know, he's looking after himself. And yeah, his teeth were all fixed.
Got myself a one-way ticket.
And we said, you know, we're just about ready for you, Bon. You know, so maybe next week sometime, you know. And of course, it never happened, you know.
Bon would never put lyrics to the music Malcolm and Angus had written. On Tuesday night, February 19th, 1980, Bon Scott went out drinking in London with a friend.
He went out just for a drink, a relaxation, you know, maybe to clear the head, you know, and then look forward to getting into his writing, come up with some ideas, you know. He had it all in front of him.
On that cold night, Bon Scott was only 33 years old, but his time was running out. After a night of heavy drinking, Bon ended the evening alone, passed out in a car parked outside his friend's house. In the morning, he was found dead.
From what I still can gather, he had fallen asleep, you know, in a car and more or less, you know, asphyxiated, you know.
He choked through the night, the position he was sleeping in. You know?
During the night, Bon had apparently vomited in his sleep and choked to death. Angus was the first band member to get the sad news.
I had called the guy that was managing us, and he told me, you know, that it was true that he had died, so, you know.
Angus called me. I was just totally stunned. You can't explain a death and how it affects you, you know. Everything just is numb. It's as simple as that.
Wondered, you know, just what do you do?
Scotland Yard said the body of Bon Scott
was discovered last night in the car. Post-mortem will be carried out later today.
Was the result of some heavy drinking.
Within hours, everyone in the band knew the awful truth, and the media were already flashing the news of Bon's death. Malcolm took it upon himself to notify Bon's family in Australia before the tabloid reporters got to them first.
Someone had to tell them, you know, and it better coming from one of the band than from a newspaper.
Over the phone, yeah, got a shock of my life. Because I thought it was him on the end of the phone. Because I just screamed. Yeah.
most difficult thing I've ever had to do. God knows how they felt. I hope I never have to do anything like that again.
The band pulled together and refused all interviews, while Bon's death was sensationalized in the tabloid press.
Especially in Britain, they made it a bit of a joke almost, you know, and we've never forgiven them for that. All we were concerned about, mainly at that time, was Bon's parents. They're really nice people. They don't need this.
A lot of the stories are, it's not very good reading sometimes, you know. I just had to skip over the bad bits.
As the grim news swirled around them, Bon's friends and bandmates dealt with the pain of a crushing blow.
I mean, that was Bon's life. I mean, you know, even though he was this sweet, lovely guy, he did drink a lot. He did sort of live the rock and roll lifestyle to its absolute extreme. But, gee, you know, Bon had been drunk before. I mean, Bon shouldn't have died.
It was a loss to us of this incredible character that all of us had embraced, and he'd embraced us all.
Work on ACDC's new album was suspended, and Malcolm and Angus flew home to Australia to lend support to Bon's parents and mourn the loss of a man who had become brother to them.
When you're younger, you don't really think that something like death is going to touch you. You know, I'd never really had that, you know, a tragedy that close, you know, and especially someone like Bon. It was just one of those things where, you know, one day somebody's there and it's so hard to believe that the next day they're not there.
On March 1st, 1980, Bon Scott was buried in Fremantle, the town where he was raised.
And you go through the motions of the funeral and everything else, but you're just numb. You know, you're just dumbfounded. You can't believe what's really happened, you know.
I don't think we'll ever get over that one, you know.